Hello, my name is Jose Martin-Garcia, and I will be presenting new advances in the geography framework, things like new geoprotocols, ways to transform geopositions, and a new bridge to the geometry functionality. So in this talk, Chris and I are going to be reporting on ongoing work to improve a dataset. So dataset is an object that plays a double role in the Wolfram language. On the one hand, it allows us to visualize and interact with data in the form of nested arrays and associations. On the other hand, it's an object which we can query and get information from that data. So it's natural to separate the two parts, and I will be talking a bit about the computational and structural part first, and then Chris will be talking about the typesetting part. So with respect to the structural part, my main effort is being to make dataset faster, more predictable. I will explain in a moment what that means. But essentially, there will be, in this first round of changes, no relevant change in computational behavior. So my part is kind of boring in comparison. Nothing changes. So I will be quick, and Chris will then explain his changes in the typesetting part. So one of the main things in relation to the structure and computation in dataset is the relevance of a type. And I will explain in a moment what that means. So I'm trying to scale down the importance of this type to make it faster. Also, we want to have more documentation on dataset. And that would be the initial round of changes. Then future bigger changes will include using different internal representations depending on the structure of the input. So sometimes when you have an array of data and expressing it as nested associations will repeat the keys multiple times, so we want to avoid that. We want to also use different backends, like using dataset to interact with data in files, also databases. We want to have better interaction with other functions in the systems, like time series. And also, of course, we want to extend the query language in several directions. So yeah, so what's the relevance of dataset type? So for example, oh, but can I evaluate?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have our example here of a dataset for planets. And yeah, so what I was saying before, I don't know what that is. Oh, goodness. This is the X kernel. Well, OK. I can explain it well. So I was going to get the type out of this object, then get the type of the transpose object, and show that depending on whether you yeah. So yes, I was going to show that depending on whether you get the type directly after the transposition, or you do this, which is normalizing and getting the type again you get different things. And because the types of the dataset affects various parts, like a typesetting, you may end up having the exact same data with different type settings. And this is something that has been reported as a problem. And in fact, yesterday I learned that Seth Chandler has created a function repository function just to force recomputation of types on datasets. So this is something we want to avoid. And the new idea that we will be using in the future is we will have a faster way of computing types, computed only when needed, and being cached to avoid recomputation. So I'm sorry, but this function will be less useful in the future. Yes. Yes. Something else that it's worth having in mind is that query computations do not use the type. So in that front, that's safe. And then, final thing I want to say is that we also want to remove. Can we? Is this evaluatable? Let's see. Oh, yeah, this. Yeah. So another thing that Dataset has always had is this metadata. So the output form of Dataset has the data, the type. So I was going to show some types before, but it doesn't matter. And then some metadata. So this idea has been always problematic because you cannot equate the same data with itself because it will have different IDs. So we are planning to remove this object, which is used only to keep track of the history of the data set. So something I wanted to know is whether anybody is using this ID for any reason. If so, please let me know, because I want to know why, because this is going to go away very soon. OK, so, yep.
Is the history important to subsequent transformations?
No, actually it can mess it up in the sense of producing types that are history dependent and then leading you into the concluding that you have a different object while you actually have the same.
You want to make it so it doesn't have to know about the history?
No. OK, so that was my quick recap of changes that are going to go into the structure of Dataset. And now I will let Chris continue.
OK, my mic OK? All right, so I'm going to tell you about interactivity and formatting changes to Dataset, and there are quite a few more of those. And I really want to get your feedback on this too. So as you're listening to this, think about whether what we're proposing is going to work for you. If you want changes, or if there's something that's not on our list that's on yours, let me know at the end of the talk. So the first thing you'll see is a very slight formatting change. The scroll bar here is grouped with the content with a frame. What you don't see immediately are some new interactivity, new interactive controls. So if you right-click on a header, there are new sort and hide controls, so you can sort and reverse sort by column. And you can hide columns. You can hide rows to give you a more focused view into your data set.
Other than blanking the data, did hide collapse it to 0?
Was that, so hide collapses it to a small, just a very narrow column to save screen space.
Kind of big though. I mean, the row is, I mean, if you wanted to not distract the reader,
Yeah.
it's a bigger space than you might want.
And so the comment was that the row was kind of large. The reason was, I'll do it here. The row was taller because it doesn't currently hide the entire row. It hides item-wise, which may or may not be a good thing. The advantage of that is you can go in here and you can expose one of these because they're there and accessible. The disadvantage is that it's not as compact as it might be. That's not a settled detail yet. OK, so this is what you get by default when you look at the planets. There's an item displayed option that gives you explicit control over how many things are displayed. So this will display 4 rows and gives you a scroll bar so you can access the other elements. That goes by levels. So if you say items displayed items displayed 4-2, so that displays 4 rows and 2 columns and gives you a horizontal scroll bar for the column. You can specify any number of levels. So if I go here and say all 1 that says display all planets, all planet properties, 1 moon per planet, and 1 item per moon, which is just the mass. There's a mass and radius that says hide the radius. And like under the planets, there's an exposure thing here that says you can click to see all the planets. There's also a vertical exposure bar, which you can click to see everything under the moons column. Okay, there are a whole slew of new formatting options, and these essentially parallel what you can do with grid currently, but it's generalized to the multi-level structure of Dataset. So there's background, item style, item display function, alignment, item size, hidden items, and analogous options for the headers. So you can control the formatting of the headers separately from the content of the dataset. So let me explain the option syntax. It's very flexible and complete, and I'll explain it using the background option. So if you just give a single value, then that applies to the entire data set. So this makes all the items in the data set have a light blue background. You can, as you can with items displayed, you can specify multiple levels. So in this case, I said make rows light blue, make columns light green. Well, every item exists in a row and a column, so it mixes those colors, and you get the resulting mixture. Various options, some of them combine things, some of them override depending on the nature of the option. And I think we're doing the right thing. This is very useful if you want to have like indexed columns and indexed rows so you can more easily follow your data set. It's nice to have the colors combined. This works like
In the grid, you can make a list of like light green, light red, light green, light red, and it would alternate the column colors.
right, like this. Okay, so as he's pointing out, as in grid, you can give a spec, which gives you repeating colors or a list of colors. So this says make the first row light blue, make the second row light green. If you enclose those in another layer of parenthesis, then you get cyclic colors, which is a useful thing to make it easier to follow the rows or columns in your data set. And in addition, you can give explicit rules that color individual items. So you see, okay, so this one just makes the Earth row light orange in addition to the cyclic background. And in this case, I'm saying make Earth row light orange as well as the radius column light orange. And you see on the left-hand side here, it says all comma radius. That might be a little cryptic. If that is the path that it gives you. If I hover over radius, you see down here, well, you probably can't read it. It's annotated here, all radius. It tells you the path to that column. That's what you give on the left-hand side of the option. If giving colors, oops, that's the wrong one. I'm using the side notes of the presentation for the first time, and it's not working as smoothly as I expected it would. Okay, so that's not it either. Okay. So you can also, by specifying Earth radius, I can color an individual item in the data set in addition to what I've done before. Now, if that is not flexible enough for you, in place of any place you can put a color, you can also put a function that returns a color. And the function is fed the value of the data set item, the path to the data set item, as well as the entire data set. So in this case, it's being awfully slow.
The documentation part is going to be pretty important with all these optionality.
The documentation, yeah, it'll be completely documented. Yeah.
Sends some really cool, neat examples showing every function possible.
Right. The neat example.
Yeah. Holy cow, your data could look this pretty.
I'm having a hard time getting my inputs into my notebook. Hang on just a second. Okay, there we go. So in this case, as I said, you can put a function in place of any color. You can use that to get more insight into your data by coloring by value. In this case, I've made every passenger whose age is less than 30. I've highlighted that with a cyan background.
An option to show the condition and the color, like the legend on the right side?
The question is will there be an option to have a legend? We haven't considered that, no.
Because if you only print out like a PDF of this to someone, they'd be like, what is this?
Yeah. The question is, how would you, I mean, you probably don't want to have that pure function in your legend. Yeah, I mean, that's something to think about. I'll make note of that. Okay, so
I guess the question is Dataset used for exploration or is it more used for publication? Or you want it to be both?
I think it's useful for both.
I mean, the cool thing will be to have a manipulator say, okay, I want to find a range, and you can change the colors at the same time.
I'll get to that. You can do that. Yeah. Okay, so just like with items, you can use a header background option, and you have control over the backgrounds of all the headers. This has make all the row headers light orange, all the column headers light blue. Okay, just like background option, there's an item style option, which controls the formatting of the content. So you can make the age row bold 18 point to call it out.
May I interrupt? Is it correct that you only have 9 minutes left?
3 minutes left.
Queries, new queries.
Pardon?
Tell us about new queries.
New queries. That's Jose's department, not mine. I'm just talking about formatting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, this is going slower than I anticipated because of the using the presentation things. I'll try to speed up a little bit. So there's also an item display function, which gives you complete control over how things are formatted. So this is the Titanic data set as you get it raw. But you can change the way that those data items are presented by giving an item display function. So in this case, instead of showing a numeric age, I'm using the age to govern the length of a bar, so I get a kind of bar graph presentation of that data. And going further, I can map the sex to a symbol for sex and give a check mark for who survived. So you can present a data set in pretty much any way you want to by using that item display function. There's an alignment option, which does what you would expect. There is an item size option to control the cell size vertically and horizontally. There's a hidden items option, which gives you programmatic control over what I showed you earlier with the interactive controls to hide things. Though that's the end of the current formatting options. One thing that's new that will be new is in 12.1, the data is not stored in the notebook with the data set, which is bad. That means if you create a data set output, you restart the kernel, it no longer has access to the data. You can't scroll, you can't drill down, you can't do any of the interactive stuff. You can only do the top level presentation. That is now fixed. So by default, when you create a data set output, it stores the data in the notebook. That's governed by the summary box data size limit, which is currently a megabyte. So if the data is less than a megabyte, it'll store it in the notebook. If it's greater than that limit, let's set it down to a lower value. So I'm going to set it down to 1,000, a kilobyte. And now, when I evaluate this, I get a button, I get a tab at the bottom that says data not in notebook, store now. It's just like how sparse array works. So you can click that button and the data's in the notebook if you want. Okay, let's set that limit back to where it was. One more thing. In 12.1 dataset, I'll just tell you about this, not show you. In 12.1, dataset does not function properly within dynamic or in a manipulate environment. It doesn't have any activity. Scroll bars don't show up. It works now within dynamic just like it does outside.
In what environment?
Pardon?
It doesn't work properly in what environment?
Within dynamic or manipulate.
Did you mean to say that it doesn't work in 12.0 and does work in 12.1?
That's what I meant to say. It doesn't work in 12.0. Yeah.
We were all.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, let me just quickly go over other things which I can't show you, but they're on the agenda. One is a truncation function. So you currently don't have any control over when dataset decides to shorten an element and show it in a lighted form. We'll give you an option that gives you explicit control over that. So it'll control when something is lighted, and there'll be another option, truncation display function, that you can explicitly specify how things are lighted using short or shallow or your own function. There are cases where, since a data set considers any level of list or association to be part of the data set rather than the data, if you have data which is, say, a 3x3 array, data set will think that's part of the data set and not an atomic item. We'll provide an option that gives you explicit control over that as well. And These are items which are on the agenda. They definitely won't be in 12.1. They're still under discussion whether we're going to implement these or not, but maybe something you want is on this list. If so, you should let me know. We don't currently support internal scrolling. The scroll bars are only for the external top-level rows and columns. Technically, it's a hard thing to do, so we're inclined not to do it unless somebody really wants that. Index headers is adding headers to, if you have an array. Currently, associations have keys which give you headers, but if you have an array, it doesn't show any headers for indices. Row and column locking, so that if you scroll a data set, some items will stay fixed. Multi-column sorting, so that you can sort by one column and then a second column to break ties. Orientation option, you don't currently have any control over what decisions Dataset makes in choosing columns and rows. We may give you explicit control over that. There are many cases where Dataset does strange things, like you'll drill down and suddenly things are in a different format. We're going to address that. People have asked for pivot tables, tabbed data sets, like in a spreadsheet, and grouping by frame style. There the idea is if you have say a three-dimensional array, you get one two-dimensional block, and there's no differentiation between the sort of the top-level blocks. And the plan is to use line weights, graphical line weights in the frame styles to show you that structure. Okay, so that's all I have to say. We've gone way over. Sorry about that. Are there any, does anybody have an urgent item on their agenda that I haven't talked about?
Import fidelity.
Yeah, the question is, will it be implemented in cloud and desktop? Definitely, yes.
Importing and exporting data sets?
Importing
and exporting data sets, will any of this work of typesetting survive?
So you haven't, can you give me a scenario?
I just worked a long time to make a beautiful data set. I would like to export it and import it into a different notebook.
Okay. So you want to export a data set, import it into another, yes, the options will go with it. Is that what you're asking? If it'll lose the options or not? No, those will go with it.
I have a follow-on to exporting. I export a lot of pictures, plots, as images. That's great. How do I export a data set as an image so I can post it somewhere automatically?
The question is, how do you export a data set as an image? Well, what I would do would be rasterize, export rasterize of data set.
That will work because
Yeah.
export, just the straight export does not work. Okay.
If you want an image, you have to explicitly rasterize it. As vector graphics. Do you want to export it as vector graphics? Well, that's a good question, like an SVG or something. I haven't tried that. I don't know what'll happen.
I did have a question. How does item display function interact with things like automatic date object formatting? Does that override? What happens to, for example, date objects or?
Yeah, so the question is, do the custom display functions override the automatic formatting, like in dates and so on? Currently, you're given the raw object to operate on to do your own formatting. There will be some sort of way of indicating that you want to use the automatic formatting. So you can have an if that says, if this, do my formatting, otherwise do the automatic formatting. Yeah.